The Spinster and the Spy. Part 1. The Lady of Logic. Miss Marianne Lytton prided herself on being a woman of reason in an unreasonable world. While other ladies lost themselves to poetry, sentiment, or the charming delusions of romance, Marianne preferred the clear order of her household accounts and the measured logic of a well-tended garden. She was 28, mistress of Rose Cottage, and, if the village was to be believed, irretrievably set in her ways. Rose Cottage stood a little apart from the bustle of Hatherley, an ivy-clad Georgian dwelling that looked as though it had grown from the earth itself. Its windows overlooked the green, its chimneys sent up modest but punctual smoke, and its mistress governed it with the same precision she applied to her thoughts. Her mother, the widowed Mrs. Lytton, contented herself with embroidery, gossip, and the conviction that her daughter's intelligence was a blessing much in need of softening. "Marianne," she often said, "you will never marry if you continue to think so clearly. A man likes a woman who is agreeable, not accurate." To which Marianne invariably replied, "Then, mamma, I shall live in comfort, for accuracy at least may be relied upon." Thus their peace continued, until the spring morning when a stranger crossed the village green and overturned Marianne's tidy world. He appeared first as a dark figure against the bright wash of April sunlight, tall, purposeful, and dressed in clerical black. His stride was too assured for a man of prayer, his gaze too searching for a man without secrets. The villagers, ever hungry for novelty, stopped to observe him as he passed. Here, at last, was the new curate, sent to assist the ageing vicar of St. Corbin's. Marianne, from her parlour window, regarded him with mild interest. She noted that he carried himself like a soldier, not a servant of the church. When a gust of wind scattered a child's bundle of kindling, the stranger stooped without hesitation to gather it, his movements brisk and decisive. There was gentleness in the act, but also control. She watched him a moment longer than propriety required, then returned to her ledger, annoyed to find that her concentration had abandoned her altogether. The village, which could turn the smallest incident into an afternoon's amusement, was delighted. By the week's end, half of Hatherley had attended Lady Colville's tea for the express purpose of studying the new curate. Marianne went only because her mother insisted. Lady Colville greeted them with her usual effusion. "My dears, you are most timely. Allow me to present Mr. Jonathan Redmayne, newly of Bath. They say his sermons are very improving, though not, I hope, too severe." Mr. Redmayne bowed. "I strive for moderation, ma'am." "Excess in either virtue or vice can weary the soul." The remark, delivered with quiet humour, won instant approval. His eyes, however, were less compliant than his smile, keen, observant, almost too alive. When he was presented to Marianne, he studied her as though she were a problem to be solved. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Lytton," he said. "Lady Colville tells me you are quite the philosopher of Hatherley." Marianne met his gaze evenly. "I should not claim so much, sir. Philosophy requires more serenity than the world allows." "Then perhaps philosophy is wasted on the serene," he returned. The conversation shifted, but his voice lingered in her mind long after she left. That night, while writing in her journal, she caught herself reflecting that the curate's eyes were not the eyes of a man easily deceived. She drew a firm line through the phrase, annoyed at its intimacy, and closed the book. In the days that followed, Mr. Redmayne became a fixture of Hatherley life. His sermons were brief and arrestingly plain. His manner, courteous but distant, defied easy interpretation. He was frequently seen walking beyond the village boundaries, sometimes at dawn, sometimes long after dusk. When questioned, he replied with disarming simplicity that the solitude of nature was good for the soul. Marianne, who valued honesty above modesty, thought it odd that a clergyman should carry a pair of field glasses and a notebook filled with maps of the Devon coast. Her suspicions crystallized one Sunday afternoon when she discovered, beneath her pew cushion, a folded sheet of paper bearing a hurried scrawl. "The courier rides tonight. Delay him at any cost. R." She read it twice, then a third time, her heart hammering against her stays. A jest, a mistake, or something far more troubling. That evening, unable to resist the pull of logic or curiosity, she walked to the rectory, ostensibly to deliver strawberries from her garden. Through the hedge, she glimpsed two figures, one passing a small parcel to the other, then retreating in opposite directions. The taller figure disappeared toward the river, the other slipped into the rectory door. Her hand tightened on the basket handle. The wind rustled the hedge, as though urging her to flee. Instead, she stepped forward. Mr. Redmayne himself answered her knock. "Miss Lytton," he said pleasantly, though there was the faintest note of surprise in his voice. "To what do I owe this honour?" "I came to deliver these," she said, "and, perhaps, to return something that does not belong to me." She placed the folded note on his desk. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he sighed and sank into a chair. "You are too observant for my comfort, Miss Lytton. I cannot lie to you, though it would be the wiser course." "Then tell me the truth, sir, if it can be told." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I serve not only the church, but the crown. There are men in this district sending intelligence to France. My task is to identify them before they destroy us from within." The room seemed to contract around them. Marianne's pulse quickened, not from fear but from a strange exhilaration. "You are a spy," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "We prefer the term agent. It offends fewer consciences." She should have recoiled. Instead, she felt an odd alignment between his secrecy and her own sense of reason, as though danger itself were an equation to be solved. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Because I have no choice. You have stumbled upon my work, and your silence may determine more than your safety. May I rely upon it?" "You may," she said after a pause, "provided your work is honourable. It is that, or I should not burden you with it." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Marianne felt the quiet tremor of something that was not reason at all. That night she sat awake long after her mother's candle had gone out, listening to the wind sweep across the fields. In her mind, she saw again his face, half in light, half in shadow, and wondered which part of it she would learn to trust. Part 2. Secrets and Shadows. In the days that followed her visit to the rectory, Marianne Lytton found herself in a condition she could neither name nor entirely resist. The tranquil order of her existence, so long governed by principle, had been replaced by a secret pulse of anticipation. Every hour seemed charged with possibilities unseen, every familiar face newly suspect. The revelation that Mr. Redmayne was not merely a curate, but an agent of the crown had upended the geometry of her little world. What had once been the quiet choreography of rural life, morning calls, parish charity, the diligent pruning of roses, had become, overnight, a stage upon which unknown actors performed under disguise. She told herself it was not interest she felt, but duty. Yet each time she saw him, her pulse betrayed the lie. It began with small requests, a name to remember, a detail to observe. There was, it seemed, a foreign courier frequenting Mrs. Purfleet's lodging-house, a certain Monsieur Deschamps, polite to a fault and too fluent by half. Mr. Redmayne suspected him of carrying intelligence to the coast, though proof remained elusive. "Your neighbours," he told her one evening as they walked near the churchyard, "will notice my inquiries. But a lady's questions are rarely viewed as more than curiosity. Observe what he says, whom he greets. That alone may suffice." "I am not practised in deceit, sir," she said, her voice firmer than her hands. "Nor am I," he replied. "Deceit is the language of the wicked. We speak only its grammar, Miss Lytton, to prevent it from being used against us." His manner was quiet, persuasive, and disturbingly calm. It was impossible to tell whether his confidence was faith or habit. That night, Marianne lay awake beneath the ticking clock, trying to decide whether she had accepted his charge out of loyalty, or because the sound of his voice made obedience feel like choice. The following afternoon, she visited Mrs. Purfleet's under pretext of ordering apple tarts for her mother's tea. The house smelled of pastry and damp ink. A gentleman's coat hung drying by the fire. As Marianne waited, Monsieur Deschamps entered, slender, well-dressed, his expression too controlled for comfort. He bowed slightly. "Mademoiselle Lytton, yes? I have had the honour of seeing you at the church." "Indeed," she replied evenly. "You are recently arrived in Hatherley?" "For my health," he said. "The air here is gentle." "It has the virtue of honesty," she said, and was rewarded by a flicker, small but unmistakable, in his composure. They exchanged a few more words, the politeness of each sharpened to a point. When she departed, her instincts were troubled. There was something in his voice, an accent concealed behind precision, that seemed practiced rather than natural. That evening, she recounted her impressions at the rectory. "You are certain?" asked Mr. Redmayne, bending over his desk, where maps and coded letters lay half-hidden beneath a Bible. "As certain as one may be without impertinence." He smiled faintly. "Then your impertinence serves England." The compliment unsettled her. His approval felt perilously like temptation. Over the weeks that followed, their acquaintance deepened under the guise of duty. She became his confidant, his listener, his mirror of reason. Their meetings were never improper, always under pretext of parish business. But propriety, she found, is a poor shield when the heart has already surrendered its caution. There were moments, brief, accidental, when their hands brushed as they examined a coded page or traced a line upon a map. Those touches, lighter than breath, lingered longer than they should. One evening, as rain beat against the windows, she caught him studying her face across the lamplight. "Forgive me," he said softly. "I am not accustomed to such courage in civilians." "And I," she returned, "am not accustomed to such secrecy in clergymen." For a heartbeat, silence bridged them. Then both looked away, as though they had glimpsed something forbidden yet inevitable. Autumn ripened. The leaves turned bronze, the air grew sweet with smoke, and the villagers, with unshakable optimism, planned the annual harvest dance. The barn on Mr. Pemberton's land was to be hung with lanterns and garlands, the fiddles tuned, the cider barrels filled. The event, simple as it was, offered the perfect veil for darker errands. Mr. Redmayne explained the plan in a voice stripped of sentiment. "The courier will attend. He bears a scar behind his ear. When the music begins, he will meet his contact by the west doors. I will be near, but not near enough to act without signal. And the signal?" A handkerchief. Dropped, carelessly, as though by accident. "And if it fails? Then you will leave," he said firmly, "and I will finish what I began." She wanted to protest, to say that he underestimated both her resolve and her intelligence, but the look in his eyes stilled her. It was not command, it was care. "Promise me," he said, "that you will not endanger yourself for my sake." "I do not recall agreeing to obey you, sir," she murmured. "No," he said quietly. "You never do." In the final days before the dance, Marianne lived as though in two worlds. To her mother and neighbours she remained the composed Miss Lytton, attending to errands and needlework. But inwardly she measured each hour against the approaching night, listening to her thoughts as if they were the ticking of a clock counting down to something irrevocable. Once, while crossing the lane near dusk, she sensed a presence behind her, footsteps keeping her pace, then stopping when she did. Fear brushed the back of her neck like a cold wind. She turned quickly and saw nothing. But later, when she told Mr. Redmayne, he paled. You should not walk alone. The enemy watches those who stand too near the truth. Then perhaps, she said, he should fear the truth's company. He looked at her then, not with admiration, but with something more fragile, more human. You speak as though you believe in me. I believe, she replied, that you would not deceive me without reason. The words hung between them like a candle's flame, fragile and unsteady, but enough to light the path they could no longer deny. At last, the night of the harvest dance arrived. The barn blazed with lamplight and laughter, fiddles scraped, dancers spun, and cider flowed freely. The air smelled of apples and straw, of joy untainted by suspicion. But beneath the music ran another rhythm, swift, taut, invisible. Marianne stood by the door, her pale blue gown simple but elegant, her eyes scanning the crowd. There, the violinist with the faint white scar, and near the back, speaking to the man in the dark coat, Sir Basil Harcourt, the local magistrate. Her breath caught. Harcourt was known for his severity, his political zeal, his unyielding sense of control. What business could he have with a foreign courier? Her fingers tightened on the folded handkerchief. Across the room, Jonathan, Mr. Redmayne, met her gaze. His expression was calm, but she saw the warning in his eyes. She moved deliberately, pretending to steady herself against the table and let the handkerchief fall to the floor. Sir Basil's head turned sharply. Their eyes met across the distance, and Marianne knew with chilling certainty that she had been seen. The music swelled. The crowd laughed. But beneath the noise, danger quickened. Harcourt stepped toward her, smiling as though in greeting. Miss Lytton, he said, his tone a study in courtesy. You look pale. Perhaps a breath of air. She tried to refuse, but he had already offered his arm. The lantern light flickered over his composed face, revealing nothing of the thoughts behind it. Beyond the open doors, the night waited, cool, vast, and silent. Where are we going? She asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Only a little way, he said. There are matters better spoken where the music does not interrupt. From the darkness, she thought she heard a footstep, a shadow following, unseen. In that instant, Marianne understood that the dance was over, and the true play had begun. Part 3. The Snare and the Storm. The air beyond the barn was honest and cold, the sort that stripped every pretense from the night and left only intention behind. Lantern glow broke on the yard like pools of amber, but the hedgerows held a deeper dark. Sir Basil Harcourt's arm was light beneath Marianne's hand, yet she felt the iron of his will as surely as if he had bound her. You are feverish, Miss Lytton, he observed, the very picture of solicitude. A short turn will restore you. I do not require it, she said, and the night carried the steadiness of her tone farther than she meant it to. Come now, he murmured, steering her towards the shadowed side of the barn. Do not make a scene. Hatherley dislikes scenes. From within, the fiddles leapt into a lively reel and a cheer went up. The door stood open upon that bright, false world, and for one reckless instant Marianne considered flinging herself back into it. But Sir Basil had anticipated the thought. His hand closed just enough to warn. She yielded, not to him, but to calculation. Courage, if it was to succeed, must spend itself where the account would balance. They turned the corner. The yard opened into a narrow track leading towards the river meadows. A carriage waited there, its wheels sunk a little in the ruts, its horses steaming in the cold. A man stepped out from the hedge. No words, only the efficient exchange of a look with Harcourt. Pray, where are we going? Marianne asked. She hated the tremor she heard, small but present. She despised fear, and yet it is the first honest witness. To where conversation can be conducted without interruption, Sir Basil replied, his voice smooth as parchment. You have mislaid a handkerchief, Miss Lytton. One should always retrieve what one drops. He guided her to the carriage. The door opened, the world narrowed to darkness and the scent of leather. A shawl, someone's shawl, not hers, fell over her hair, obscuring the lights. She did not cry out. A cry is a weapon. One must never fire too soon. The carriage lurched forward. With the first turn of the wheel, the sounds of the barn sank to a distant hum, as if the village itself had been folded and placed in a drawer. The road took them along the river, where the night water spoke in its soft, relentless voice. Marianne fixed the rhythm in her mind. If she was to find her way back, she would need the music of the ford, the roughness of the stones, the hollow echo beneath the little bridge. Sense could yet save her where sentiment could not. Sir Basil sat opposite, the outline of his face occasionally etched by passing starlight. You were foolish, Miss Lytton, he said without heat. You meddle in affairs that do not concern you. On the contrary, she returned, and was surprised to find her courage in the seat beside her. The safety of my country concerns me very much. Patriotism is a vanity you share with the curate, he said. You mistake it for virtue because it flatters your opinions. Men like Mr. Redmayne are gratifying in villages. They make us feel vital. In London, they are a type, useful, noisy, ultimately replaceable. Then why fear him? I do not fear him. I manage him. He turned his head to the dark, as I shall tonight. They drove into the avenue of elms leading to Harcourt Hall. The house rose out of the fields like a reprimand, its windows unlit, its stones remembering every winter that had tested them. The door opened before the carriage fully stopped. The same blank-mouthed servant took her in hand, the shawl remaining over her hair until a smaller chamber swallowed them, and the door shut like a judge's book. The room was ill-suited to comfort. A low fire burned, a table, a single chair, a length of rope upon it, nothing more. Sir Basil stood by the hearth, one hand on the mantel, the other resting upon a pistol placed with studied care. Sit, if you please. She remained standing. What do you want of me? He seemed honestly tired of explanation. A letter, a few lines will suffice. You will write to Mr. Redmayne. You will inform him that you are in difficulty and beg his assistance. I will arrange to welcome him. He will not come, she said, though her heart betrayed her with a leap. Harcourt's smile barely changed his face. Miss Lytton, men who prefer duty to ease do not leave ladies in peril. He will come, and alone. And if I refuse to write? Then I shall improve your manners. He nodded, and the rope congratulated itself by being employed. The men who bound her were not cruel, only cruelly efficient. The cords took her wrists and sang their small, unpleasant song. She sat because the chair insisted. Sir Basil adjusted the pistol so that it contemplated her with detached interest, like a bird that had found an insect but was not yet hungry. You admire the appearance of justice, she said. You will never love the thing itself. Justice, he replied, almost kindly, is merely order in its ceremonial dress. I adore it. He offered the paper and pen. She did not move. There are times when a woman's only weapon is immobility, and Marianne employed it with delicacy. The pen trembled in the shadow, as if eager to begin. She would not. Very well, he said, and reached for the pistol. The door, until that moment in league with him, decided it had suffered enough collusion. It swung inward on its complaint of a hinge, and the night entered upon the shoulders of a man who had thrown off his collar so thoroughly that even the darkness respected him. Jonathan Redmayne did not pause at the threshold. In a single stride he crossed the distance that argument would have delayed and seized Harcourt's wrist with an economy of motion no parish ever taught. The pistol barked, Plaster sprang from the wall like startled pigeons, the room filled with smoke and the smell of everything undignified. One of Harcourt's men rushed with the clumsy honesty of the heavy. Jonathan met him with a quiet, brutal turn that made the fellow sit down by the simple expedient of not being able to stand. The other lunged towards Marianne. She lifted her bound hands and struck him in the ear with a force that surprised them both. He fell not from pain, but from confusion, which is often a more obliging servant. Harcourt struggled. Jonathan was not elegant, he was exact. The pistol clattered to the hearth, the magistrate to the floor. The servant with the blank mouth discovered a voice at last, and used it to beg for another profession. Silence followed, the big, embarrassed silence that always attends the end of violence. Jonathan turned at once to Marianne. He said nothing at first, only bent to the ropes with a deftness that suggested more experience than she wished him to possess. The cords loosened, the blood returned to her hands in a flurry of pins. The room steadied. "You are hurt?" he asked, very low. "Only in my patience," she managed, and saw his mouth almost smile before duty forbade it. "We cannot linger," he said. "Others will come." He bound Harcourt with his own ropes, an irony so tidy that Marianne would have applauded had it not seemed vulgar, and secured the two men with a speed that owed everything to practice and nothing to luck. Then he extinguished the candle with a pinch and led her out into the corridor where the house held its breath. They moved quickly, their steps made small by urgency. On the stair, Marianne faltered. His hand found her elbow and steadied more than her balance. The front door gave them to the night like absolution. Cold air met her like a tonic. Stars, shy but present, admitted that the sky had not abandoned them. "This way," he whispered, and she followed through the thin-walled quiet of sleeping hedges. Once they stopped, because stopping quietly is sometimes louder than running. Somewhere to their left, a man coughed, a careful, rehearsed cough. Jonathan answered with 3 notes whistled under his breath, a child's tune dressed as conspiracy. The darkness possessed a reply that detached itself into a man of small height and excellent purpose. "Carts hid by the osiers, sir," the fellow murmured. "Roads clear as a conscience no one believes in." "Good," Jonathan said. "See to the hall as arranged." The man melted away. Together, Jonathan and Marianne took the river path, where the air smelled of iron and memory. She did not ask questions. She had learned during those weeks of maps and invisible ink that the most useful silence is the one that agrees to reveal nothing. Only when the barn's lanterns were small, soot-soft stars did she speak. "He said you would come alone." "I brought what I needed," he replied. "Which was not men. And if you had not—" She did not like the thinness in her voice. "Then I should have come differently," he said, and there was something in the steadiness of the answer that restored her to herself. They came to the ford where stones made their old, wet music. The water clutched her boots and let go with regret. On the far bank, the night thinned to the kind of darkness through which a house might be found. Rose Cottage, when they reached it by the kitchen door, received them with the decent astonishment of small dwellings asked to contain history. Mrs. Lytton, in a wrapper and dignity, appeared with a candlestick and the look of a woman who suspects both adventure and the need to forgive it. To her everlasting credit, she said only, "Mr. Redmayne, tea," and did not demand to know why her daughter's gown bore the memory of a rope. "Gratefully," he said, though he did not drink it. Reports were made without drama. The words Harcourt Hall and London and papers crossed the table in their tidy clothes. When they had said what must be said, he rose. On the threshold, he turned. The candle held him like a border between 2 lives, the curate the village owned, and the man Marianne had seen tonight in a room with a pistol on the table. He looked at her in a way that relocated the world. "You were brave," he said. "I will not praise you, because praise is a poor reward for what I made you risk. But I will remember. She found the smile she had misplaced somewhere between the barn and the river. "Then we are even, sir." "No," he said quietly. "Not even at all." He left with that quickness that prevents gratitude from becoming a conversation. The door closed. The house returned to its own small sounds. The tea cooled. Marianne sat at the table and discovered that her hands were steady. The ropes had left their faint, unjust bracelets upon her wrists. The night had left a louder mark upon her heart. She did not touch either. Instead, she folded her hands as she had always done before a ledger and waited for the noise within her to choose its shape. By morning, Hatherley had, with its usual talent, decided that nothing remarkable had occurred. The baker baked. The smith hammered. Lady Colville pronounced the dance a success and added to those within reach that the curate's absence after the second set had been a pity. He was so very improving to the floor. The river kept its secrets with an air of injured innocence. Harcourt Hall's shutters were not opened. Jonathan came at noon with news. Harcourt, conveyed before dawn, had been escorted towards Exeter and thence to London. Useful papers had been found, papers that condemned without gossip. The courier had been apprehended on the Dover road. He had fallen without romance, which is the only honest way for such men to fall. "It will end in offices," Jonathan said with a tired half-smile. "Ink will finish what we began." "And you?" Marianne asked. "I?" He glanced at the garden where frost made lace of the last rose leaves. "I am recalled to London. For a little while only, if they are merciful. If not—" He did not finish. Mrs. Lytton offered common sense like a shawl. "You will return when your work allows, Mr. Redmayne. We shall keep the fire obligingly." He inclined his head and took his leave. Marianne accompanied him to the gate because habit insists on putting formality's hands upon feeling's shoulders. The lane was uncommonly quiet. Even the birds seemed to be waiting for a better line. "I have said nothing," he observed. "That would make your life more difficult than I've already made it." "Then you have been very prudent," she said. She tried to smile and could not quite. He looked at her, truly looked, and the world rearranged itself to allow the distance between them to be called what it was. "Marianne," he began, and stopped, because names are sometimes too powerful to employ in daylight. "If I am fortunate, I shall return soon. If I am not, I shall write." "Then I will read," she answered, and heard in her own voice the confession she had sworn not to make. He bowed as a man bows when he must, not when he wishes, and walked away into the road's patient vanishing. She watched until the turning took him. Then she stood a moment longer, for love, having attended the lesson, is always reluctant to leave the schoolroom. That night the wind rose and shouldered the sky. The house complained softly and forgave itself. Marianne lay awake, hearing not danger, but absence. When sleep came, it was the sleep of those who have used up their courage for the day and must borrow against tomorrow. Somewhere a gate creaked. Somewhere a river told and retold a story it could not keep to itself. The storm had broken. Its weather remained. Part 4. The Reckoning of the Heart. Morning returned to Hatherley with that particular grace known only to small villages that have flirted with disaster and chosen to forget it. The air smelt of thawed frost and baking bread. Windows opened, milkmaids sang, and if any soul had dreamt of pistols, spies, or treachery, the daylight obligingly denied it. At Rose Cottage, peace had reasserted its rule with firm hands and soft manners. Mrs. Lytton, fortified by the belief that Providence rewarded those who stayed home, had resumed her embroidery. "It is astonishing," she told her daughter, "how very swiftly the extraordinary becomes ordinary. Only last week we had a curate kidnapped, and yet today I cannot decide between mauve or lilac for my new cap." Marianne smiled and threaded her needle for her. "Then let us choose lilac, Mamma." Mauve would suggest unrest. She spoke lightly, but inside her heart was far from tranquil. Jonathan Redmayne had been gone 6 weeks. His letters came irregularly, never more than a few lines. They spoke of proceedings in London, of inquiries concluded, of men unmasked, but little of himself. Each page ended with the same restrained valediction. I remain your grateful servant in all things that honour truth. She knew that tone. It was his armour. And yet between its lines she read weariness, loneliness, perhaps even danger. Every evening when the lamps were lit, she took one of his letters from her desk, read it slowly, then replaced it with careful reverence, as though each word were a promise waiting to be kept. Winter gathered its skirts across the moors. Frost embroidered the hedges, and the river, once a conspirator, became a ribbon of silver under the cold sun. Hatherley prepared for Christmas with the calm diligence of those who expect holiness to be punctual. The vicar recovered enough to preach again, and the curate's empty seat at the rectory table became the village's favourite subject of wistful speculation. "He will return," said Mrs. Lytton confidently. "Clergymen are like cats. Once accustomed to comfort, they do not stray far." Marianne merely smiled. Hope, she had learned, was a discipline, not a weakness. Then, one grey afternoon, the post arrived with a single letter bearing a London seal. She opened it slowly, half fearing its contents. "My dear Miss Lytton, forgive the abruptness of my pen. The business for which I was sent has ended, though not without cost. I return as soon as my duties permit. There are matters I would speak which cannot be written, even in friendship. Until then, think of me kindly. Yours, in gratitude and in hope, J.R." The letter trembled between her fingers. In gratitude and in hope. Gratitude she had expected. Hope was a gift she had not dared claim. 2 days later, as twilight settled like a veil upon the green, a traveller walked into Hatherley from the Exeter road. His coat was plain, his step steady, but the air around him carried the quiet command of one who had survived necessity. He paused at the inn long enough to inquire after the health of the parish, and then turned toward Rose Cottage. Marianne, seated by the fire, heard the gate latch lift. A moment later, the familiar figure stood framed in the doorway, his face thinner, his hair damp with mist, but his eyes alight with that same clear, steady intelligence that had first disarmed her. She rose, though she scarcely felt the motion. "Mr. Redmayne," she said softly, the name almost a prayer. "Miss Lytton." He bowed, then smiled faintly. "It seems Hatherley survives even without a sermon." "You left us better equipped for virtue than you found us," she replied. Mrs. Lytton appeared, exclaimed with pleasure, and immediately began pressing tea, blankets, and inquiries upon him until the room itself seemed to breathe again. At last, satisfied that both her guests were adequately attended to, she retired to fetch the cake that custom demanded. The silence that followed was gentle but weighty. Jonathan stood before the hearth, the firelight gilding the lines of fatigue on his face. "You are well?" he asked. "Well enough to resume my arguments," she answered, "though I find I no longer enjoy winning them quite so much." He smiled, tired, genuine. "Then my absence has served some moral purpose." She hesitated. "And you, sir? You have seen too much, perhaps?" He looked into the flames. "Enough to know that peace is rarer than courage and harder earned. There were trials, some of them moral rather than mortal, but they are finished now. Harcourt will stand before Parliament. His accomplices are unmasked. The rest—" He stopped, searching for words that would not sound like weariness. "The rest is ink and bureaucracy. I am not suited to either." "Then what remains for you?" He turned to her. "That depends on whether Hatherley will have me again. The vicar will rejoice in your return." "I was not speaking of the vicar." The words landed softly but altered the shape of the air between them. Marianne's heart, ever the enemy of discretion, quickened. Before she could reply, Mrs. Lytton reappeared with the tea tray and a quantity of remarks sufficient to drown a proposal. The moment dissolved, but its echo remained, bright as a struck chord. The weeks that followed were marked by a quiet renewal. Jonathan resumed his duties at St. Corbin's, though his sermons carried a gravity that silenced even Lady Colville's interruptions. The villagers approved, they loved to feel improved. And yet, beneath the tranquillity of routine, something new had begun to move between him and Marianne, a tenderness disciplined by respect, an understanding deeper than words. They walked often along the river now, no longer under the cloak of conspiracy, but in the honest companionship of those who have shared danger. One evening, as the sun sank in pale fire behind the moors, he spoke. "When I was a boy," he said, "I imagined duty as a sword, sharp, bright, and noble. I thought to serve by striking, but these months have taught me that the truer work lies in endurance. And what rewards the man who endures? Sometimes, nothing. Sometimes, this." He looked at her. The privilege of returning. Her breath caught, but she made herself answer with calm. "Then I trust you will remain long enough to justify the privilege." "If I stay," he said, "I must stay for the right reason." "And what would that be?" He stopped walking, the twilight gathering around them like a benediction. "Not because duty commands it, but because affection allows it." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was sacred. She could not answer at first. When she found her voice, it was hardly more than a whisper. "Then stay, Mr. Redmayne. Affection permits it." He looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing the shape of that sentence, then bowed his head. "I shall never disobey it again." They were married in February, beneath a sky washed clean by rain. The church was bright with winter greenery. The villagers, delighted by romance that cost them nothing, turned out in their best. Lady Colville whispered to 3 people that she had predicted it all along. Marianne wore ivory, simple, elegant, and carried no jewels save the calm certainty in her eyes. Jonathan, solemn in his black coat, took her hand with a reverence that made the vicar forget his place in the service. When the vows were spoken and the final amen fell, sunlight broke through the clouds and poured across the chancel. Marianne would remember it all her life, the smell of beeswax, the sound of bells, the sense that logic itself had yielded to something finer, something truer than certainty. They settled at the rectory, where roses soon claimed the garden and laughter reclaimed the rooms. Mrs. Lytton moved contentedly into a suite of her own and declared herself surrounded by perfection. "A curate and a daughter, both married to common sense," she announced, "is all I ever prayed for." Jonathan still received the occasional sealed letter bearing no signature. When he opened them, Marianne asked no questions, only poured his tea and waited until the gravity left his eyes. And when the last candle was snuffed and the world belonged again to them alone, she would rest her hand on his and say, "Whatever they ask of you, remember, you are already serving England here." On one such evening, early in spring, they sat together by the open window. The air smelled of lilac. A nightingale sang beyond the hedge. Jonathan closed the book he had been pretending to read. "Tell me truly," he said, "do you ever regret the adventure?" "Regret it?" She laughed softly. "I sometimes wish it had been less perilous, but then it might have led me to someone less worth the peril." He smiled, leaned forward, and pressed a kiss to her hand, light, reverent, and utterly sure. "Then we are agreed. Reason brought us together, but love has kept us honest." "And curiosity," she added. "Do not forget that." It began with a question. He looked at her with quiet amusement, and ended with an answer. "No," she said, her eyes luminous in the firelight. It ended with a life. Outside, the river murmured past the village it had once betrayed and now blessed. The house glowed with peace. The world seemed, for the space of an evening, entirely forgiven. And so it was that Marianne Lytton, once the spinster of logic, became the spy's wife, the curate's companion, and the quiet heart of a story that had begun, like all worthwhile things, with reason, and concluded, gloriously, in love. The end. If you've enjoyed this story of love, redemption, and quiet courage, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll be the first to hear our next Regency romance on the Regency Gazette channel. Thank you for listening.